Okay.
So, synchronizing.
Do you want me to look into the camera or look at you?
At me.
Okay, very
me.
good.
I will be moving, but anyway. Okay, hi Martina.
Hi, Vladimir.
It's so nice to meet you in person.
Likewise.
We were some time in correspondence concerning possible project, but now at least I have a pleasure to meet you in person and enjoy connecting with you.
Yes.
I am serious, since I really see you as very, very open and feminine human being. And for me, it's very important
Yes.
to meet a real woman.
Yes.
And so
I hope I can do that.
my first question is about one of the main line of your art connected with principle of feminine,
Yes.
woman energy,
Yes.
mother of the earth. How it came into your art?
So how the feminine came into my art?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think there's somebody there. We have to stop because somebody's like, yeah.
Вова, просто Стэн сказал, что он сейчас занят царем, он не может сейчас к тебе прийти, он сказал, что она просто была первая, с ней закончит и придет. Я не смогу его привести, потому что сейчас начинается.
А ты объяснила ему где?
Я ему сказала, что напротив Девиля, Сент-Джордж. Он говорит, я сам постараюсь найти.
Хорошо.
Ну, просто к тому, чтобы ты знал, что он не сейчас придет, но если не придет, что ты...
Хорошо, хорошо, хорошо. Спасибо, Наташенька.
Thank
Спасибо.
you. No worries.
She just told information
just
about
Stan,
Stan,
yes,
who is
that's what I
busy with
figured.
Irena, and he
Yes.
excused that he don't know how.
Yes. Thank you. So we do it again now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can
I
just
just start,
at any
okay.
moment you can just
Okay, okay.
start reply.
So, okay. So the feminine in my art entered at a very early point because I've always been interested in feminism, and I'm of that first generation right after the feminist generation, and I felt that I was, we felt in the 70s that we were the first generation to implement everything that the feminists had been talking about. So at first my interest in the feminine was more political, but in time it changed as I developed spiritually. My focus became more centered around the sacred feminine. And so I became interested in the teachings of the writings of Maria Gimbudas. I became aware of the goddess cultures that had reigned about 5,000 years ago, the matriarchy, the possibility that those tribes and civilizations were possibly without war because those the settlements that they found that were supposedly run by women predominantly did not seem to have any fortifications, and it was pretty much the horsemen that came from the east that overran those civilizations and took over and brought in the patriarchy. This is how the history goes. But anyway, I don't want to get stuck in that too much. What is most important to me is that the sacred feminine has been a very beautiful force in my life, and I feel that at this point in our evolution, it is very important that the feminine comes into balance with the male, because the male energy has been ruling the planet for quite a long time now, and the effects are less than perfect. So I feel that the moment the feminine will come in and will be equal with the male, we will have more peace on earth. We will have more balance in all levels of life. And so throughout my work with spirit teachers and my work with energy work, I felt that the feminine has always been there. It's been I've been working with. At first, I was very interested in the mother type. That was early on in my life when I was a mother myself, and I was much more thinking about the aspects of womanhood that had to do with procreation and taking care of children and the family. But that changed for me, and then as I focused much more on my work as an artist, I became more interested in in the aspects of the feminine that are empowering in other ways, the power of women, the strength of women, the intelligence of women, the women as the shamans, as the teachers, as the elders, as the keeper of the mysteries, because women have so much more to offer than just the ability to give birth. And of course this is a beautiful gift that we are, without the feminine there would be no life on this planet, of course, but there is so much more to our lives. And in this time and age, I feel that women don't have to identify themselves just through motherhood, because that was our only option in the past. We identified ourselves through our beauty, our youth, and then motherhood, and that was the end of the story. And in indigenous cultures, of course, that has always been different, because in indigenous cultures, the women are actually more revered after they pass their procreational lifespan, and they become the wise women. And this is something that has been missing in our society. And so I'm very focused on bringing this wisdom and this power of women to our awareness in my art.
Martina, when we are talking about Great Mother, when we are talking about feminine principle
Yes.
and the importance of feminine in modern life,
Yes.
as you explain us,
Yes.
there is also somewhere on the background man, real man.
Yes,
Since
of course.
Real feminine is
Of course.
impossible. And so how you see men?
How do I see men? Well, I was very lucky to have lived with a real man. This was my partner, Robert. I lived with him. I knew him for 30 years until his departure, his transition last year. And during this time, I had the great pleasure to be with the man who really supported women. Robert always explained to me that the liberation of women was also the liberation of men, because men also were in a bind with this whole dependence of women on the support of men. And when women became more independent and self-dependent, men were also let off the hook to be more ready to embrace their softer sides. They didn't have to be the providers all the time. They didn't have to be strong all the time, all of a sudden. So for me, a real man is a man who can honor his feelings, who can be vulnerable and soft, who can openly show his weaknesses, and who can show his emotions, and who does not feel that he has to put up this front and this facade. And a real man is a man who really loves women to the point of seeing a woman as his equal.
In the history of humanity, there is always an ideal of secret union, secret marriage.
Yes.
Like androgyny in alchemy, like tantric unity of tantric gods and goddesses.
Yes.
Adi Buddha, for example, in Tibetan Buddhism, it's
Yes.
naked Buddha and naked Buddha partner.
Yes.
He and she. And how you see the influence of this ideal in history of humanity, and particularly in your life?
Okay.
Something like center of the cyclone and double cyclone.
Right.
If you refer,
Yes.
for example, to John Lilly and his story.
Well, it's I see this beautiful tantric union. I see that as a great symbol of the perfect complement. Two people who come together and they work together as a team. They support each other, and they make bigger energy than just the two parts. They make an incredible. They create something that is so much bigger than even just a simple love union. When I met Robert, of course, in the beginning of a relationship, you have this incredible attraction, and there's the passion and the love, and all of that stays. But what is so beautiful in a long relationship is how the love transmutes and how it becomes so much more. and how it becomes the sacred union in the end. That is, maybe there is a potential in the beginning, but as two people really work together and get to know each other and open up to each other at abandon, to the point where you can be completely naked in front of the other, and really, if a perfect relationship for me is the one where two people can be absolutely themselves, where there's, where we can come to this place where we can openly show who we are and everything is acceptable, and yet we support each other in our growth. And when we reach this point, we become the perfect complementary partner, and there's an incredible symbiosis that happens.
I think this is very important. I think you can also share with the world your experience of partnership, spiritual partnerships. It's so important for all of us.
It is. And I know that when we were together, people used to make comments on how our relationship was very special, how they saw the love that ran much deeper than just that surface, affatuation and two people being in love. Of course we were, but it was really, really deep, and we had this, we were each other's worlds and homes.
It looks for me inseparable, your relationship, your art. And anyway, I want to ask you a question about how your relationship and its play and richness was influenced by your art, by your artistic inspiration, your artistic mission, and vice versa, how your relationship inspired your art.
Okay, yeah. First of all, we really lived together 24 hours a day. We shared everything. We were partners in life, and we worked together as teachers. We taught workshops for many years, and we lectured together, and we shared studios. For many years we actually worked in the same space, and then we decided to have studios side by side. But we always communicated while we created together, and we were each other's critics, and so we constantly were in communication. That did not mean that we were so joined that we were like Siamese twins. We were connected, but we tried at any given point to preserve our individualities. This is a very important point in relationship, to be one, but yet to honor that there's two individuals, because you can't lose yourself in the other person. Yes, in a way, yes, but in your expression, there should be something that is still you as an individual. And so our art, of course, we appreciated each other's art, and Robert's art was very luminous. He loved the astral planes and the light. And my work, I think, is a lot more maybe earthy. I work with. I like the shamanic energy. I've painted, many of my paintings are about the shamanic realm and how it is to travel. And I paint also a lot about the energy, like the energy that is unleashed when we engage in spiritual practice, or when we have spiritual experience. It doesn't have to be spiritual practice, because we can be walking in a beautiful forest and we can have spiritual experience. It doesn't need, people don't have to. In my opinion, there's a lot of beautiful spiritual experiences that we have every day, but most people don't even recognize them. Then they're not aware of them because their minds are too busy. They're too distracted, they don't make the quiet and the space. They don't allow the space to, they don't allow the space and the quiet to really recognize that this is a sacred experience. And so all of that sacredness is something that happens all the time. And so I'm very interested in showing that energy. How it feels and how it is and what it looks like. Of course, it's very personal, but this is my way of showing it in my paintings. So,
what do you think is the message of your art to all of us?
The message of my art, well, that's a difficult question. First of all, when I paint, I don't paint for anybody else but myself. So when I paint, I never consider anybody besides me. This sounds a little self-centered, but it's not meant that way. For me, the creative process is a form of meditation, and it's like it's one of my deepest states of meditation. When I start painting, it takes me just a little moment where I'm still in my mind, maybe, but after maybe a few minutes, hopefully, or maybe after half an hour, all of a sudden there's a change, and I enter a different reality. It's almost like I'm pushing through a veil, and I'm in this other reality where what I do is not even an act of me anymore. I feel like what happens on the canvas is something that is coming through me. It's something that is guided, or I'm the tool. I see myself as a tool for the higher forces, for the spirit. Spirit comes through me, or energy comes through me, or messages come through me. And I just trust that, and I just paint. And sometimes it's almost like automatic. It's a very automatic process. And it's a very deep state of meditation where my mind goes completely somewhere else, and the part of me that is creating is not my mind. My mind, actually, you know what I really enjoy when I paint is I love having conversations with people. That this way, my left brain, my mind is very busy.
You mean during painting?
Yes, so I can actually have a conversation, and I like to talk about beautiful things, maybe spiritual things, or philosophical things, things of the heart. And when I talk to somebody, my mind is so busy that it goes there to the conversation, and then the creative part, the real deep part of me, the holistic me, the right side of me, that part is actually free to create without interfering from the mental reality.
And how you distinguish between, for example, high inspiration channel and some lower, some evil forces trying to use you to manifest?
Okay, well, so I had an experience a long time ago where it was actually in the Amazon with a beautiful shamanic plant medicine called ayahuasca. This is a special medicine that has been used for many thousands of years by the indigenous tribes in the Amazon rainforest. And I was guided by a shaman, and I entered a tunnel. And there was a little bit of fear at first because the tunnel was very ominous and dark, and there were some spirits that seemed to be somewhat forbidding. And but I connected with these spirits. I found that they were actually. I looked around. I found a different perspective with these forces that frightened me, and I was able to see that as I changed my perspective, they were not frightening at all. They were just like the Wizard of Oz. Okay, so now I'm entering this tunnel, and I'm going very deep, very deep. It felt like I was going into the center of the earth, or into this very, very dark space. And at the end of this tunnel, I saw all of a sudden the most beautiful entity I've ever encountered. It was very reptilian, and it had these incredible scales, and it had these colors, and it was just magnificent to look at. But then the force that came from it was so tremendous, and I fell in love with this being. Every part of my body and of my soul, of every part of my being wanted to become one with this being. And it was an experience it was emotional, it was deep emotion, it was love, it was erotic, it was spiritual, it was everything. And as I found myself slowly melting with this being and me disappearing, just before I completely disappeared into it, I pulled back and I said, oh, I know what you are. You're the dark side, and I'm not for you because I've never been with the dark side. So to answer your question, I believe that all my life I don't say that I don't have a shadow side, because all human beings do, but all my life I felt that it was always the light forces that have guided me.
So we can always distinguish and we can always choose.
Yes, we can always choose, and yes, and distinguish, yes.
And I want to ask you also about how we can use this channel with higher, with something higher. Since you've said that something higher, some high source is using you when you are creating paintings, but can also artists, can also you use this channel to move towards light, to move towards higher, to develop, to evolutionate?
With my art.
Yeah.
Yes, well,
can artists be a pathway to develop?
Yes. I think by painting what I do paint, I'm also exploring. I'm creating roadmaps to source. You know, I like to call God the source, because there's only one source, and we come from it, we go back to it. And for me, the creative process is one of the most magnificent ways to connect with source energy. And doing visionary art, painting visionary art as I do, this is my work, is in the visionary vein, I feel that I'm creating roadmaps to that source. I'm showing how to get there. I'm showing how it feels to be involved with that energy. I'm showing how the energy moves around us. I'm showing how to get there. I'm showing, sometimes I show, you know, I've done self-portraits in a state of meditation. I've done self-portraits in a state of engaging with certain shamanic practices. And so I explore and I make conscious, by painting these things, I also integrate my experiences and I make them conscious to myself, and I materialize them, because when we make a picture of something, we bring the energy. When I have a spiritual experience or like an epiphany, and I paint about it, then I make an image of it, and by doing this, I make it material. I bring it here, but I don't just bring it here for myself. I also bring it here for other people. So when, as I said in the beginning, predominantly I paint for myself. I don't consider my audience, but when I see that somebody enjoys what I do, of course it's a tremendous pleasure, because then I know I did something that is for everybody, and that's extremely validating for me. It makes me feel good. I like to share my work, of course, but the person who sees my work also can have an experience. And even whether I tell them about, for me it's not important to share with them how I feel about my work. It's not important for me to say, this is the title, and this is how I felt when I painted it, and this is what I want to say. No, this is not important at all. I feel that I'd rather show a piece to somebody, to my audience, and then they can have their own experience with it much better without the titles, because I don't want to give them a hook. I don't want to give them anything to hold on to. I want them to feel something, but I want them to have their own. It's like looking into a mirror. It's like creating a beautiful mirror, you know, where people can see and they can find their own reflections.
So you don't want to belong to museum of art, to come archive of art. You want to be a living tradition, encouraging.
Yes, I mean, of course. No, I mean, if my work is in a museum, of course, that's just fine. No, I didn't say that I wouldn't want to be involved in that way. It's just that I like to keep it very free flow. Yes.
And you are with your friends frontiers of tradition of visionary art. You've explained yesterday in so great details. And as far as I understand, visionary artists share with other artists the spirit of creativity.
Yes.
But they distinguished from other direction of art one specific connection with divine, with spirituality, with kind of fantasy, the very source of inspiration.
And sometimes the shadow side too.
Yeah, sure.
Because of course the darkness can also be a way, exploring the dark side, the shadow side can also be a way to connect with spirit.
And can you explain what is specific features of visionary art?
Specific features of visionary art. So I feel that visionary art is it's a very ancient tradition. Its visionary art has existed since the beginning of time. Whether we look at the old cave paintings and or we look at we look at medieval art, the mystic painters of medieval times like Hildegard von Bingen, or we look at Hieronymus Bosch or Peter Bruegel the Elder, who was very influenced by Bosch in his more mystical visionary paintings, because he was also a landscape painter and a peasant. You know, he portrayed life in the Flemish world in those days. But then there's throughout the ages, in every century, there have existed visionary artists, and I find that visionary art is probably our most direct, our most honest way to create art. It comes from our need to explain or make sense of our position in the universe. How did we manage to end up here, and what are we doing here, and what is our relationship to the higher source, and what is our place? What is our function here with all of this? You know, how do we fit in, and how do we stay connected with spirit? And for some people it might be very simple, a simple statement like, how do we find God? You know, that could be at the root of visionary art. But there's many ways and the fantastic. You know, the fantastic often deals with the dream world, or the magical part of nature. You know, or the spirit worlds that some of the northern mythologies are so. The Celtic tradition talks so much about the spirit world and how nature is so animated, how nature has this whole other realm, the shamanic worlds. All of that is visionary art, and it's always about our connection to spirit.
Several years before the Second World War, Walt Disney had connected with mescaline experience.
Yes.
And as we know, he created fantasy.
Yes, Fantasia.
Fantasia, yeah.
Yes.
And he were trying to find the source of fantasia, fantasy in our life. How everything is manifesting from some primordial ground. This was his original idea.
Yes.
And do you think that fantasia is also a piece of visionary art?
I believe so. Yes, yes. I think it's a fantastic piece of visionary art. I think it's one of his most incredible pieces he's ever created. And I'm a big fan of that film. And everybody who pays attention sees immediately, you know, that this painting must have been created by somebody who had an experience of an expanded consciousness at some point. However, whatever means of whatever method he used, because there's many ways of getting there. You know.
Some stories in fantasy, you remember with dinosaurs.
Oh yes,
with,
beautiful.
Ancient Greek. It's a kind of an attempt to understand the whole history of evolution on the
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. No, it's a beautiful piece for sure.
You did mention in your yesterday talk one of the very interesting, to my mind, visionary artists from Lithuania, Čiurlionis. Are you familiar with him, Čiurlionis?
No, I'm not.
No.
No.
Somebody
to research.
Works.
Yeah. Well, I find that a lot of the Eastern art is very beautiful and very, very spiritual and very, very magical and very visionary.
Yeah, we have in Moscow a museum of art of crazy people.
Oh yes, the outside art. Outside art. It's called outside art in English. Yes.
Outsiders. Also,
outsiders. Yes.
In Moscow.
Yeah.
And many paintings there are like paintings of your friend you showed.
Of course. Yes. Because it's very and the outside artists they're often not trained. Often they're not academically trained oftentimes, and they just some have, sometimes they have history of mental problems, but not always. It could just be that they've been traumatized, or that they're just manic, or there's so many ways there's so many aspects to outside art, but I love it. I love raw art. It's very beautiful as well. Yeah.
You've mentioned yesterday showing paintings of some of your colleagues, paintings before ayahuasca experience and paintings after
Yes.
ayahuasca experience. How your connection with ancient authentic tradition, Amazonian tradition, for example, influenced your art?
Oh, well, I certainly, I can say that my work changed dramatically after I had experience with Amazonian plant teachers, and it became very, my work became much more colorful and much more daring, I would say, and because the realms that you perceive during these journeys, they're just so multidimensional and so fantastic that you can't help but paint them. So my work just really, for many years now, I've been really trying to transcribe that world. It's very difficult because, of course, how can you put multidimensional experiences onto a canvas, onto a flat surface? Already, it's very difficult to make 3D on a 2D surface, but I think I've managed to find my language. I've created a visionary, a visual language that allows me to somehow bring some of this energy back. And oftentimes people ask me, why do you paint in such bright colors? And it's not that I necessarily have a preference for these bright colors, these yellows and reds and greens and blues. No, but it's because the experience looks like that. So what do? I use those colors.
You try just
to make it very authentic,
Yeah.
And a lot of times when I meet people who have had these experiences and they see my work, they recognize immediately where it comes from.
Martina, how it happens that you became an artist?
How did I become an artist?
Yeah.
Well, I was an artist from my childhood on. I always drew. I always loved creating, making things. As a child, I would always build things and find things in the woods and bring them home and make beautiful sculptures, or I would just occupy myself drawing pictures all my childhood long. I was an only child, so I had a lot of time on my hands. So I would always busy myself with that. So all my life, I really enjoyed being creative. And later on, I studied art. I studied sculpting at the university in Frankfurt in Germany, Johann Wolfgang Goethe University. And but it was really my husband, Robert Venosa, who inspired me through his beautiful work to become a painter. And I owe this decision to step into this world of becoming an artist, a full-time artist and a painter, to him. Because when I met him, he was an accomplished artist, and he was there to guide me and mentor me, and this is how it came about, and the rest is history.
And do you like everything in his paintings? Or
Yeah.
are there some preferences?
No, I think I'm his greatest fan. I think I love Robert's work so much. He was an amazing artist. He really created this iconography that was so unique. There's nobody who paints the light like he does. I'm sure he's still doing it. Now he has much better set of paint box up there, Now
no limitations.
There's no more limitations for him, and he's finally where he's finally living, I'm sure, the spaces that he painted. No, he was unparalleled in being able to create these astral worlds, and the way he was able to create translucency nobody had done before him.
So he taught you in a way to to develop your talents, so to say, to be a master of painting.
Yes, yes. He became my best critic, my best and my worst, because he was very, he was tough, and he would be a very good critic for me always, and I became a very good critic for him. We always criticized each other's work. And, we would always look about, you would say, what do you think, Martina? And I would say, yeah, I like that, but that color, not so good. So then we would, it's the way you work together as a couple, as an artist couple. There's nothing like being with another artist. I would have a very difficult time now that I'm by myself, and I know that sometime down the line there will be another person in my life. And I have a very difficult time to imagine that this person is not going to be an artist.
Being greatest critic and greatest expert in his art, can you share with us what is the essence of his art?
The essence of his art? Well, let me think. That's a very, very complex question. Yeah. The essence of Robert's art. Robert wanted to show. Robert painted realities beyond this reality. He created a whole world that was complete with landscapes and plants and creatures, so he really was able to bring here the possibility of another dimension. And he made it very, very visible. He made it very feasible. I think he painted, many times he painted the astral planes. But he also painted alien worlds, alien landscapes. And we all suspect that we're not the only entities, living entities in this universe. And I think there's many, many planets and planes that that are alive just like us. They might be different forms, and so they might even be here. Who's to say? They might even be here, and we just don't recognize them because they are different from what we expect them to be. So we don't have the perception, and we don't have the system to recognize that life, or as existence, or as intelligence.
Can you tell me some personal stuff about your relationship, about what you learned in the final stage of your living together?
Mm-hmm. The final stage.
Yeah.
Yes.
Last month, for example.
Yes. Well, Robert was diagnosed with cancer 9 years ago, before he died, almost 9 years before he died. And at that point, the doctors gave him 3 months to live. And Robert pretty much decided that he did not want the usual treatments of radiation and surgery. And so we embarked on a whole different course, which included the work with shamanic plant medicines, with ayahuasca specifically. Mm-hmm. So we traveled regularly to the Amazon.
Was it helpful?
It was helpful. It was helpful because with strong entheogens such as ayahuasca, every experience is like a rehearsal for the final transition. Because each time we go, we have to cross over. And it takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of strength to do this. But it also teaches us how to surrender. The first rule is always the surrendering to the process and the opening up to other possibilities. And through the surrendering, we also learn how to lose our fears. And we practice to be more comfortable with other dimensions and with the way everything looks and feels differently. we train to exist within that expansion. That it's very difficult to feel that expansion on a daily basis in this reality because the body limits us, our lives, our human lives limit us. So, but the practice is really, really beautiful and important, and once you have, and sometimes you can actually have death experiences under the influence of entheogens, and when you have these experiences, you can experience what it feels like, because it feels real. When you have these experiences, it feels just like dying. And of course, in that moment, you're never quite sure, because you're so altered, you're never quite sure whether this is for real or not. It's very difficult in that moment to remember that you actually ingested some plant medicine and that this is only a temporary event, that you will come back. But in that moment, it feels real. But when we have that experience, it's an opportunity for us to really let go and allow for this final transition to happen. And when we actually relax into the experience becomes very beautiful. And that was also, with all of this work that we had done with the shamans, when Robert entered his final stage of life, and he became weaker, and he lost his strength, and he certainly displayed a lot of courage. He was very strong. He never lost his. He didn't change personality. Sometimes when people get very sick, they can become bitter or afraid, and he never did that. He stayed very much with the experience. He was very patient. He surrendered all of himself, and I did with him, because you have no choice. And so I think together we did it very well. We were very close to each other, and I tried to do as much of the caretaking myself as possible, because I did not want I didn't want our lives to change. I wanted us to be at home, which we were at home. He was in his bed, and we were in our house. And there was not anybody else there except for maybe a few people coming in and out, a nurse sometimes, or sometimes the doctor. But basically we had the life just as before, only he was slowly getting weaker. And in his final moments, I was actually, he fell into a coma. And while he was in the coma, I spoke to him often. And what I learned was that I had done everything except that I had not given him permission to actually disconnect. And I know that I'm pretty sure that he was actually, he stayed a lot longer for me because he didn't want to leave me. It wasn't so much for him. He told me, he said, for me it's okay, I can go now. But he says, but I don't want to leave you. So he stayed, and in the way he slowly disconnected, he became weaker. I had to witness that. That's a big, big process. So to see a beautiful, strong man become less and less, and then to be so weak that he can't walk anymore, we had to carry him. And then finally he fell into a coma, and then in that coma he even gave me another 10 days to get used to that idea of him of not speaking anymore. Then he wasn't moving anymore. And then he wasn't breathing properly anymore. So it was almost as if he set it up so I can get used to it. And when I felt that his, you know when a person dies. It's the most amazing thing. It's just, I had stepped outside because a friend, my girlfriend, had tried to, because I was always in the room, because I didn't want to leave. Sometimes people said, come on, Martina, you have to eat something or go for a walk. And I would eat in half an hour and rush right back to the room. I didn't want to miss him. And my friend had asked me to step outside. It was a beautiful August early evening. And she said, come on, let's sit on this bench. And I sat there for 4 minutes or 5 minutes, and I became very nervous. And all of a sudden, I stood up and I ran back into the hospital. and she could barely keep up with me. And I was in the room for maybe 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and the process began. And so I held him. I took him in my arms, and I put my forehead to his, and I just started to tell him everything I wanted to tell him. I wanted him to know. I encouraged him to go to the light. I said, go to the light, go towards the light now. We have practiced this for so long, so many times, and you can just completely release yourself, and you're beautiful, and you know how to do this, and I just want your soul to fly, and I want you to feel uninhibited. Just let it be, let it go. And I just talked to him, and I talked to him, and I told him how much I loved him until he gave his last breath. And there was a beautiful moment too before he fell into a coma, because that morning he woke up and he cried, and he said, I don't have much time. And I said, I was shocked, and I said, are you dying right this moment? And he said, no, not yet. He says, but it's imminent. I don't know, but I feel it's really coming. And he started to tell me, and he says, I've done some good things in my life, but I've also done some bad things. And in that moment, I just looked at him, and I said, no remorse and no guilt. Don't, just like, it's all good. You did such a beautiful job. So, I didn't want him to, in that moment, everything became it was so intimate. It was the most intimate moment we ever spent together. In that moment, just to look into each other's eyes and to say, it's all forgiven, and it's all beautiful. And, and so those were the last days of his life. And there was so much grace in that moment of transition. And he, even in his passing, he was such a teacher. He was a beautiful teacher, and he had a lot to offer. But in these last moments, he initiated me. I feel he really initiated me, and he really allowed me to take a glimpse. I took a glimpse, because I think I took him as far as I could. I feel in that moment, I felt I was almost going with him. And then there came this point where I couldn't go any further. But it took me, I was so out of my body, it took me a long time to come back in, because I had been traveling with him. I'd been astral traveling with him, and I was very much, I think in those moments we just, in order to survive, our spirit just leaves the body, and the body kind of functions, it's just like it becomes this automatic vehicle. It's amazing what the human body is capable of, without sleep for days, and all the things I had to do to help him, to help his physical form become ashes, and to create the memorials, and to invite, to have people, and to celebrate. And I don't even know how I did all that, but it's just but in that moment of his transition, he was just so he gave so much, and he was so peaceful, and what remained after he died was an incredible state of grace that stayed with me for a long time, and it's still here. It's this. It's very difficult to describe. The Native American Indians, they actually recognize that state of grace. And when a person is being born, or when a person is dying, the whole village wants to be a part of it. People almost line up, because they feel that if you're in the presence of this incredible event, spirit jumps into some of us. If you're lucky, that energy that is released in that moment of birthing into another dimension at death, that spirit comes into us, and it stays with us, and it's an incredible state of grace and beauty. Yeah, because dying is just as we help somebody die, and if we do it conscientiously, we are becoming midwives for the next life.
Yeah. I know from my personal experience that when we are losing somebody with whom we are very really deep connected spiritually, in a sense, we are not separating.
No,
Never.
Yes.
And when my teacher and very close friend died, with whom I was connected for 10 years, our team, we read for him Tibetan Book of the Dead, and after funerals, it was just great tragedy for all his friends. After funeral, I had a dream. Me coming to his grave. It was winter, and then miraculously, his grave was opened, and I've seen him laughing, and shaking, and just transforming into dusts.
Yes.
Yeah, and I felt released. I felt that it was a kind of message from other side to me,
Yes.
from him, that don't be attached. I am here.
Yes,
My
exactly.
body, my
don't
body
look at the body.
disappears.
Yes.
Yeah, but
That's it.
yeah.
That's it. And I feel the same with Robert, because he's given me many communications to, he's manipulated the lights or the telephone lines, but I've sensed him in the wind, in nature, and I've dreamt about him, and I had visions with him, and I even had experiences where I felt that he was sitting on my bed, and where he was in the room, and he actually touched my body, and so it's just, and I know that he's here. He's totally here. And today, when I did the breathwork session, because you asked me before, what was your experience? Well, my experience was that I went, deeply into my sorrow, but then I went, and then I experienced death. But it was not a frightening experience. I've experienced it from a place of love and gratitude. And so I felt this transition, and I felt the openness, and I looked at it from a place that was completely without fear. It was just from a place of acceptance, from a place of it just is. And then what happened was I connected with Robert, and we became this, because you were talking about the sacred union. And what I felt was that our energies were completely merging. And it was so beautiful. And it was just him saying, I'm here. I'm always here. We're always together. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it never ended.
Never ended, yeah.
My friend died 20 years ago, but almost every day I am talking to him.
Yes.
It's so natural.
Yes.
And I'm not crazy.
No, of course
I don't
not.
feel that I am connected with some other world.
Yeah.
But in a sense, he's here in reality.
He is. Yes, he is. Yes, he's here energetically, and I feel that he is actually. He's been helping me. Sometimes there are moments where I'm wondering how these things could just happen. It's almost like I've got this amazing assistant who is making these things happening for me. And I'm going, wow, this was incredible. The synchronicity and how it all flows, and I didn't have to do anything for this to happen. And it's like Robert is making all the arrangements. Sometimes I feel that, It's quite amazing. It's beautiful. Yeah.
I don't know what else to ask. We cover a lot of very important things.
Yeah, wonderful.
If you want to say something by your own, maybe.
Oh, I don't know. Let's see. What do I want to say by myself? Let me think about this.
About anything.
Yeah.
You think?
Yeah.
Maybe a fun, some story.
Some story.
Yeah, we can include into the film.
Okay. Let me just think about that. Yeah.
From your life, from your
from
journeys,
my life,
from anything. Some funny stuff, some maybe unusual stuff.
Yeah. Let me think here.
To share.
Let me think. What is there that I could tell? It's always difficult, when you, in a normal conversation, it's easy to come up with stories. But when you have the camera pointed at you, it's like, I don't know what to say.
Forget about any camera. We are just
Yeah,
talking.
Let's
Sit
see,
in
what kind of
restaurant,
what kind of a story can I tell you?
It can be a kind of artistic story. You were traveling a lot.
Yes.
By the way, what language you used for your personal communication between yourself?
Between myself? What
no,
language?
No, between you and Roberto.
Oh, okay. Well, Robert and I always spoke English.
English.
Because he had he was a New Yorker, and
Yeah.
Americans don't know
sure,
how
sure,
to speak
English,
languages. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There's I think three races that really don't do well with languages. It's the Americans, the British, and the French. The French are completely hopeless too. They just don't. I don't know what that is. And so Robert would always be. He was very. He grew up. He was 100% Italian, and. He was third generation New York Italian, and but he was very sorry that his family, that his mother never spoke Italian with him.
Yeah.
So he was always amazed that I knew all these languages. But for me, I was born in Germany, so I grew up with
German,
that. And
English,
French, Spanish. So I grew up, I spent 5 years in Africa, and I went to French elementary school. So French is my second mother tongue. And then, when I met Robert, my school English was quickly transformed into proper English because, of course, when you learn in school, it's not the same thing. So yeah, always English between us. And Robert would say sometimes, you speak better English than most Americans. And you know what is really interesting? I was just in Paris with a friend of mine, and she says, your grammar in French is better than most French people. I'm going, well, that's a good compliment,
German background, probably, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. So that's very nice. So let's see.
So do you feel yourself like international?
I am international, so really, because a lot of times when people ask me where are you from, I have a very hard time to answer this because it's I can't just say, because yes, I was born in Germany. I never felt German, especially not when I came back from Africa. I was not German anymore. At that point, I had already lived with so many different cultures because the French culture is dominant in Cameroon. Then there's all these other European cultures that are there, Germans, there's Italians, there's Spanish people, there's Russian people, and we had all these friends. And then there's, of course, the biggest culture, there's the African cultures, but then there's so many different tribes and languages. So when I came back, I felt like I was a world citizen. So I really, and then I moved a lot in my childhood. I was always going from one place. I never stayed very long in one place. So as a child, in order to survive, I had to learn how to make my home here. So I never put my roots down. So home for me, I don't know what that is. Some people say, oh, my home is where I was born and I love to go back and I'm homesick. I don't really have that. The only place I'm homesick for sometimes is Cadaqués, Spain. Because that became my first, it was the first place I ever felt home in. And when I discovered Cadaqués, I
was
knew
your tribe, yeah.
It was just right, but it wasn't just the people. The people were one thing, and that was amazing because because the community is very. It was an artist community. It was very bohemian, writers and musicians and painters and sculptors and movie makers and just kids and people, very expressive and very creative. Very unusual people go there. And so it was a wonderful, wonderful creative space, very hedonistic, very full of life. But what's really important about Cadaqués too is the nature. The nature is very powerful. There's the Mediterranean, which is an incredible ocean, because people always think the Mediterranean is a quiet ocean. No, the Mediterranean is very, very active. Many weather changes and the waves, and it can be many things. There's the wind. that comes from the mountains, because the Pyrenees, Cadaqués is surrounded by the foothills of the Pyrenees, and the wind just kind of sometimes comes down, it just whips, and the Tramontana, there's so many winds in Cadaqués. They have names for all these winds. There's the wind from the sea, and then there's the wind from the desert, and there's a wind from the mountains, and Cadaqués is famous for that. So it always changes, and so the place is full of, just like my life was always a change, the wind is constantly changing everything. So sometimes you have the light, and then there's the clouds, and it's constantly moving. So yeah, where do I come from? I make my home in Boulder, Colorado. I love Colorado, and Boulder is an exceptional place, and that's kind of my home. But it's not. It's a place. It's a place I love well. But I think I'm more. If I have something that is the closest to a home would be Spain. It would be Cadaqués, the northern parts of Catalonia.
Yeah. I think I know why. Since your primal identity is a kind of community of creative people.
Yes.
And kind of natural force and energy.
Yes.
And Caracas is a place where all this is manifested so brilliantly.
Yeah. Yeah, and they say too that Cadaqués is a Scorpio place, and I'm a Scorpio. So I have Scorpio, a lot of Scorpio energy, and Cadaqués has that too. It's a place, it's a very transformative place. You come there, and there's certain power spots on the planet when you come there, whatever is there for you, it becomes magnified. And it becomes like a journey. So you can't escape yourself in Cadaqués. You have to be ready to face yourself all the time. It's very challenging, So, and then very interesting story also about Cadaqués, besides being, the town of Dalí, that was his home. He made Cadaqués his home. But in the Middle Ages, the witches of Europe used to go and congregate in Cadaqués once a year. So there was a big meeting every year, and there's also altars in the Cap de Creos, which is the big nature preserve. It's the rocks, the wild rocks outside of Cadaqués.
Is it supposed to be a place for Walpurgisnian night?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Yes. Walpurgisnacht.
Walpurgisnacht.
Yes.
We have one person who was a friend, both your friend and also my friend, and I want to speak about him. It is Terence McKenna, whom I love so much, and whom I excited and was inspired by whom so much.
Yes.
Can you share some stories?
Yeah, Terence. Well, Terence McKenna was, I think, the most... He was just the most brilliant human being. Of course, there's a lot of brilliant human beings, but Terence had this incredible mixture of intelligence, knowledge, because he was a constant reader. I once asked him, I said, Terence, do you speed read? He says, no. He says, I don't. He says, I read normal speed. He says, but I read continuously. So he was always reading, and he was always staying informed. He was, first thing he would do in the morning, he would jump on his computer, and he would read the news, and he had different websites, but not just, regular news. He would have these really interesting alternative sites. But he was extremely curious. One thing, and then, of course, he had this amazing ability to paint with language. He painted pictures with language.
I think he was the poet by nature.
Everything
he was talking was a poem.
It was a
like
poem, and Terence was capable of relate the most complicated concepts to anybody and make it so the person could understand. Anybody could understand it.
He had usually ability to paint by words and also to articulate by intonation and melody, making this accessible and experienceable.
And I think he also used his voice in a shamanic way. I don't know if he did it purposefully, because his brother Dennis, I don't know if you, do you know
I've
Dennis?
met him several times,
so Dennis, as you know, Dennis and Terence, they sound they sound identical. So when I first met Dennis, after Terence passed, I met Dennis in Malaga at a home of a friend, and that was the time when Dennis, for the first time, I think in 24 years, he opened the diaries of their travels to Peru and what happened, and he read them to a third party. He hadn't done that before. And so, and when I heard Dennis, I kept calling him Terence because, you know, Terence's way of speaking was so particular that I didn't know anybody else who spoke like that. So I couldn't get this Terence's name out of my mind. So I had to apologize to Dennis. And I said, Dennis, I'm so sorry. He says, well, he says, I'll take it as a compliment then. So, yeah, so Terence had that. And then he had this, yeah, he had this ability to, he was very funny. He had a great sense of humor. And one thing I loved about him more than anything else is that in all his brilliance, he never talked down to anybody. You know, he had this, he was so, of course that's a mark of a great person, to be absolutely authentic and kind to anybody.
Kind of innate democracy.
Absolutely. He was just like questions, sometimes silly questions came for him, you know, and of course, you know, wherever he appeared, he always attracted a very intelligent crowd, so the questions were mostly quite intelligent too. But yeah, but even if there was a question that was not so, you know, so amazing, then he would still be kind, and I really loved that about him. And I had the pleasure to know him so personally because we spent time with him in Hawaii, and whenever there was a workshop or whenever he taught in Boulder, he would stay with us. So, so I would know him how he was when he got up in the morning, and he would make himself a big cup of coffee, and within 20 minutes, he was already onto the solving the next problem in the universe. I was still trying to get my head together and wake up, and he was already, he said, well, you know, I have to talk to Ralph Abrams, and I have to kind of talk to him and see, you know, whether we can change this formula, this mathematical equation for time wave zero. And what do you think, Martina? And I'm going, wait, you know, it's like I have to wake up. So he was just such a brilliant, curious man, and he was so much fun to hang out with because we would just, you know, stay up so late, and he was a real Irishman. He loved to drink, he loved to smoke, he loved everything. Yeah. And he was and then he would get so animated, and we would sit up until 3 or 4 in the morning on our terrace in summertime and talk and get into these wild sort of concepts. And then he would get up at 8 o'clock, give a whole day of presentation, and where I would get the mat and lay in the back of the workshop and rest. And then in the evening we would start over. And he had tremendous energy. Yeah.
Do you think his ideas about time wave zero, the end of the world, he explained in the book, are physical, real, or metaphysical, or visionary? Like
I think more visionary, and yeah, I think more visionary because I don't know, for some reason I don't see the end of the world coming. And this is a very valid question because December 21st is right around the corner, and I've been asking a lot of my friends, where will you be on that date? What are you doing? And what is very interesting is that a lot of the people who have been so interested in this question, they're very much, a lot of them are just, they're not sure where they want to be, including myself.
No particular plans?
No particular plans.
To hide somewhere, to prepare food, ship?
No, I think I'm just going to be in a place, and I'm going to be conscious, I'm going to be, you know, paying attention. But I have not prepared anything, no. Have you?
I haven't particular plans.
No,
My wife will be on Tenerife with our spiritual teacher.
Wonderful, so that's good, yeah.
But I'll be somewhere in Moscow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have seminars,
Yeah.
and also I have my class in I'm teaching in institute.
Yeah. No, I think what's already happening is that we are changing. we're expanding. I think the whole, on a global level, consciousness is definitely on the rise, even if it doesn't appear like this. But that's the media doesn't allow us to see, because the media, of course, never shows what we are doing here.
And
You
what
know.
is the story of Terence McKenna portrait, Roberta
Oh,
made?
the portrait, okay. Terence McKenna portrait. Very interesting story, actually. Terence, at some point, Robert was preparing his book, and Terence agreed to write the text for it. So what is interesting about this text is that it's not his usual prose, but it's poetry. It's haikus. And Terence decided to make a poem for each painting in the book. And I believe it's probably, if not, it might be his last writing that was published. And so Robert had offered Terence, in exchange for his writing, he said, "I'll paint a portrait of you." So when the portrait was finished, we went to Hawaii, and we went to see Terence, and Robert gave him the portrait. And what was very interesting was that his girlfriend, his partner of his final years, Christy Silness, she looked at the portrait and she didn't like it. Now, it was very strange, and so she didn't explain at first, but later on she told me that what had happened was, the moment she saw the portrait, this was before Terence was diagnosed, the moment she saw the portrait, she saw that she saw his imminent demise. And so she had premonitions because of the painting. And so the portrait is a portrait of Terence with one of his beautiful Banistoriopsis vines in the background, and the mushrooms sort of spinning in a vortex fashion around him.
Robert portrayed also other psychedelic pioneers like Sasha Shulgin.
No, Dr. Albert.
Albert Hoffman, yeah.
Yes, he portrayed.
And somebody else?
No, I think he
No,
did. He did Dr. Albert Hoffman. Yeah, so that's a very beautiful portrait, and he made this portrait for maps, and it was a portrait that was also made into a limited edition print series of 50, and 50% of the proceeds go to LSD research.
Mm-hmm.
There's only a few left, I think, maybe 5 or 6 prints. All the others are sold. So, yeah.
Do you have particular plans for the future in terms of things to develop?
Well, I'm really excited to create the appropriate environment and space for myself to integrate all the experiences that have happened over the last 2 years, Robert's decline and passage, and all the aspects of my process that I went through after his transition. So, I'm planning on painting about my grieving process and what came of it, and how it's actually added to my spiritual and personal growth.
I think we covered.
Yes. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thanks, Vladimir.
It was
Pleasure.
great pleasure.
Thank you.